Okay, so now we've covered this topic. We're starting on this augmented sixth and Neapolitan sixth, and we're here. Enharmonic reinterpretation of German 6/5s and the reverse. So we can take a dominant seventh and we can reinterpret it as a German 6/5 as well. So let's take a couple examples. Here is Schubert, Gefrorene Tränen, Frozen Tears, from Winterreise. This is a real downer too. We got a lot of downers here with all this modal mixture. But this one is in a G flat and gets to F. And when you have a half-step shift like that, you can know that you're going to probably be doing one of these two kinds of interpretation. German 6/5 is 5/7 or the reverse. Now, if you take a German 6/5 and treat it as a dominant seventh, that dominant seventh is 5/7 of the Neapolitan. So that will carry you up a half step. If you go the other way around and take a dominant seventh, whatever it should have gotten you to, you will now go beneath it by a half step. So it's kind of handy to know what's going on. If we go down a half step, it means we must be dealing with a dominant seventh that becomes a German 6/5, is reinterpreted as a German 6/5. So there are a few chord symbols here to just help us get oriented. Got a 6/4, 5/7, and this would be a pedal 6/4 here because we've already heard that note in the bass. And we've got to figure out what this is right here. Okay, so this is D flat, F, A flat. Okay, now wait a minute. If we're hearing this in G flat, that's not going to sound the way it looks. He's spelling it to show how it's going to resolve. So it's going to resolve as an augmented sixth chord, as a German in the new key. And since it's spelled that way, I'm going to start with that. So if we're in F, this is a German 6/5. Verify that. You see the augmented sixth wedging out to the octave, and you see a fifth above the bass. Okay, fifth above the bass, D flat, A flat, there it is, A flat. That's what makes it German 6/5 and not some other kind of augmented sixth. You expect German 6/5s to go to dominance eventually, but usually through a cadential 6/4 to avoid those parallel fifths that are potential. This is a little tricky because there's some neighboring motion going on here. We've seen this before in another example. And it happens a lot where you get an extra chord in here that neighbors the 5. I won't go into all that again because I did on the last one. But just be aware of the neighboring motion in there. Sort of disrupting this resolution, but the resolution does occur. Alright, so we're on the dominant of F. That's C, and here we get it in root position C, E, G, and it gets to 1 in F minor. So here's our F, A flat, C chord, and then he just hammers that home, doing 5/1, 5/1. Alright, so we understand what it is in the new key. It's a German 6/5. Now let's go back to G flat and say, how are we going to hear this chord? And since you know the punchline, I'm just going to put it in there. Dominant seventh is what becomes a German 6/5. Let's verify that though. If you're in G flat, the dominant is D flat 7, D flat, F, A flat. Actually, you've got it right here. D flat, F, A flat, C flat, written out nicely for us. That's what a dominant seventh looks like in this key. Notice how he respelled that C flat though. He made it a B over here. But all the other notes are there. D flat, F, A flat, and the C flat respelled. So it is identical to this 5/7 over here. It's just spelled differently. It's enharmonically equivalent. This is pretty typical to spell it in the way that it's going to resolve. And so you have to think back, alright, what would that have meant in this context? That would have sounded like a C flat. So if you hear the beginning, this is all over this pedal and the bass. And then you hear this. That sounds like a dominant seventh, and you should go right to G flat, but you don't. He does this. Neighbors it and gets to the dominant and gets to tonic. And he's going to do this several times. And he's done. Okay. Notice how far you've come. G flat to F. I mean, that's crazy distance. Everything flat. Well, all but one. 6 flats to 4 flats. That's a big shift too. Now, it's a crazy shift too in terms of where your tonic is moved. Your tonic is moved down a half step. Remember, when you take 5/7 and reinterpret it as a German 6/5, that's what's going to happen. Let's look at the other side of the sheet and you'll see just the reverse situation. This is a little harder to see, but it's from Beethoven Symphony No. 5, second movement. We're in the context of A flat here, so you probably know this tune. Bum, 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 da, 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 dee, da, da. Same thing, just an octave higher. So when you first hear this F sharp, it sounds like G flat. It sounds like flat 7 in your key. Now if you take a tonic, this has basically been tonic all along. Tonic, yeah, there's a 5 here. But right back to tonic. Pedal 1, but there's another dominant up above there. Back to tonic. Now all he's doing is he's taking his tonic, passing up to the 7th. Now as soon as you add 7th, a minor 7th to a tonic triad, you don't have a tonic anymore. You have 5/7 of 4. So that's how we hear it at first. We hear that as a chordal 7th, the 7th of a chord. He does something a little funky in the bass here, because he started out with it with A flat here, but then he's gonna change it, and it becomes fully diminished. But that shares the same function. And you've still got the leading tone in there. A flat C is the leading tone to D flat, and you hear that it's 7 diminished of 4. So it's not like you've changed function at all. The issue is you've got A flat, C, E flat, and G flat, and as soon as you bump this up, the way it sounds is not A natural but B double flat. So it sounds like C, E flat, G flat, B double flat. In other words, it's 7 diminished for 2 of 4. Now this makes sense because we know that dominants and 7th chords do the same job. So if the leading tone is retained in a fully diminished sound, it doesn't matter how it's spelled, it's still going to have the same function as the 5 that shares all these common tones with it. So that's a little tricky, but look, he gets right back to 5/7 of 4. He takes the A back down to the A flat. It sounds like flat 6 going to 5 of 4. Okay, so we're back on 5/7 of 4, A flat, C, E flat, there, second from the top, and he's respelled it, but that's our G flat. That's the same note. That's the 7th. To our ear, so we can't hear how it's spelled. So we're going to hear it as identical to what we've been hearing, these G flats. But then he resolves it in a new way, and you can see why he respelled it, because he's going to take it up, not down. Chordal 7ths go down. He respells it to show that he's not going to resolve it as a minor 7th from the bass. He's going to resolve it as an augmented 6th. There's our augmented 6th. and it does what it should, which is wedge out by half step. F sharp goes up to G. A flat goes down to G, creating that octave that resolves the augmented sixth. Okay, so now we know that this dominant seventh sound has been reinterpreted to be a German 6/5 in the new key of C. They go to 5, but it takes it a while because, as usual, German 6/5 here is going to cadential 6/4 and then resolving there. So there's a seventh in there as well, isn't there? Here we go. So in the new key, that's going to be our predominant, our dominant, and our tonic, C. So initially you hear it, as you've been hearing all these, as a dominant seventh chord, the dominant seventh of 4. So Bell writes it should have gone to a D flat. That's what you expect. But it doesn't do that. It resolves differently. It goes to 5 in C. It's being treated as a German 6/5 in the new key. Notice that when you do this procedure, you end up being a half step lower than you had expected. So here's a dominant seventh that should go to 4. It should go to D flat in the key of A flat. D flat, okay. So we're aiming there, but we end up on C, a half step lower than where we expected to go. That's what this procedure does. It takes you down a half step.